I'm going to make a hanging sleeve for my little quilt here, and I thought I would bring you along with me and give you a little tutorial on my method for hanging sleeves. First, I want to give you a little pro tip. If you have edges on your quilt like this that are turning in, what I recommend is to actually put a hanging sleeve on the bottom as well. I have done that with this quilt, and well, you can see my little dowel rod poking out there. Actually, I didn't even put a full sleeve on there. I just put a tiny little hanger on one end, and then the other end. Use a lightweight dowel rod, that way it's not stretching your quilt out, but it is holding it flat. You can see that one's perfectly flat against the wall instead of this one, which is like coming out against the wall a good 6 inches. Okay, so your first step is to get the width of the top of your quilt. You need to lay it out wherever you need to do this to get it to lay flat. So if that's your floor, if that's your table, I'm using my long arm because it's very convenient. And then take your measurement. I usually do it from one edge of the binding to the other edge of the binding because I don't want to put the sleeve over the binding. So in this case, it's 33 inches, and we're going to add 1 inch to that, and I will show you why later. And we're going to go to the cutting table. So what you're looking for here is simply a width of fabric 8 inches long by whatever that dimension was you just got. So in this case, it was 34 inches, which is not that difficult to get. But I will say I like to keep those scraps of wide width backings that I use on hand just for this purpose, because no one's going to see this except for someone who might hang your quilt if you send it to a show or if you have somebody help you hang at home. These are going to be hidden, so it doesn't matter if it matches your quilt, it doesn't matter if it's ugly, just use what you've got. And if you don't have something wide enough, you can obviously take 8-inch strips and piece them together until you get that width. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my 8 by 34 inch piece, and I'll show you how to put it together. To make the actual sleeve, there are simply 2 steps. One is to fold under your edges, and that's why we put that extra fabric in our measurement, and sew across this. And this just eliminates loose ends, threads coming out and fraying and having a mess behind your quilt. It's a step you can skip if you don't want to do it, but it just makes for a cleaner quilt back. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for both sides. You can iron these first. I happen to be working with a really stiff fabric, and just a finger press I think is going to hold it in place. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these down. Okay, once those are done, you just have a nice little folded over edge that's stitched down. The second step is simply to take it and fold it in half. I put the sewed on edge on the inside, and then you're going to sew your long edge. So you can pin this if you're more comfortable doing that. You're going to want to sew the entire length of your sleeve, and I usually use a 1/4 inch for this too, but you're going to press that open. So if you want to make that seam larger because you're comfortable pressing that way, that's entirely up to you. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take it to the pressing table, and I'm going to press it open with the seam here in the center, because what's going to happen is when you lay this on your quilt, now the lights are too bright, when you lay this on your quilt, you're going to lay this against your quilt so that nobody sees the seam. You don't have to turn your tube inside out. You've got your clean edges on the outside here that are not going to cause any problems, and this is going to get hidden between your sleeve and the quilt. So the first time you do this, I do recommend, after you make cuts, check it with the back of your quilt and make sure that your measurements were okay and everything's coming out even. I've done this a few times, so I didn't check. But at this point, what you've got is basically your finished sleeve. There's my pressed seam right in the middle of basically the back of the sleeve. The insides is where I stitched this shut so that we don't have any loose threads coming on the outside. Now you're going to take it back to whatever your surface was that you laid your quilt out, and you're going to pin it down. I recommend using a hard surface so that you're not pinning your quilt to the floor, the carpet, or your bed. I've done that. Basically, you're just going to pin it however you like along the top edge of this, And then the next step is hand stitching. I'm not going to show that in this video. If you want to see how I do my hand stitching, you can go to my binding post where I taught hand binding. I hope this is helpful, and let me know if you have any questions.